Welcome to the Introduction Paragraphs mini lesson for 5-paragraph essays. We've talked about planning out an essay using a graphic organizer or a formal outline, but now we're going to talk more specifically about structuring the paragraph. So let's start with the introduction paragraph. The purpose of the introduction paragraph is to introduce the reader to the subject of your essay, to explain your context if you're talking about a book or if you need to clarify about the question that you're answering. Again, if you're writing about a book, you want to introduce characters or important figures, but you might not need to do that. You need to state your main point or thesis. That's your most important point throughout your whole essay, so it definitely needs to be in your intro paragraph. You also need to try to pull your reader in and clarify your essay for the audience, just making sure that they know what your essay is going to be about. So to break it down, in your introduction you have to do two things. You have to hook your audience, and you have to state your thesis with your three main reasons. Now, there are different ways to hook your audience. You can start with a question, though I warn you against this one because you don't want to say, have you ever been on vacation? I have. Today I'm going to talk to you about where I want to go on vacation. If you're going to use a question, you need to make sure that it's a thought-provoking question that maybe people haven't thought of before, something that doesn't necessarily have a direct answer. If you're not sure how to do that, then I would just avoid the question hook altogether. You can also start by doing or sharing an anecdote, which is a personal story. I think this is a great way to open an essay, particularly for the writing SOL, since most of the prompts are personal to middle schoolers. So I think that's a great way to make it interesting. You just want to make sure that your anecdote isn't too long, because if it's really long, then your reader might think it's a narrative essay. You could also start by using a trivia or interesting fact or a quote, but I will warn you that on the writing SOL you won't have outside resources to pull from, so we're not going to practice using those hooks in the next month. And you can also start by making a generalization. So let's take a look at an example from an actual SOL prompt. So here's the question. Is it better to take risks and perhaps make some mistakes, or remain cautious and risk nothing? Explain using specific details and examples in your response. So let's take a look at that intro paragraph. Everything great I've accomplished in my life has taken and required some sort of risk at first. If I hadn't tried at all, I would have missed out on singing solos in front of large audiences, best friends, and even going to college. It is better to take risks and perhaps make some mistakes because you learn from your failures, you might experience something new, and people who have achieved greatness have always taken big risks. So the first thing that I start with, if you look at this first sentence, this is what's called a generalization, because I'm saying that everything that I've accomplished in my life has required a risk. Now, if I were to look at everything that I've accomplished, there are probably a few things that I've accomplished that haven't required some sort of risk, but this generalization makes it seem really important. So you could do something like that as well. And then the way that I bridge from this generalization sentence to my thesis statement is that I share some personal accomplishments. So if I hadn't tried at all, I would have missed out on singing solos in front of people, making new friends, and going to college, because those are three things that I've done that did require some risk for an introvert like myself. I can't just go from this generalization to my thesis because I haven't shared anything that I've accomplished. So it's important to share at least a few general examples to bridge your hook to your thesis statement. Then I mentioned my three reasons. Because you learn from your failures, you might experience something new, and people who have achieved greatness have always taken big risks. I've made sure that those three reasons are very different, so I'm not going to repeat myself throughout my essay. Let's take a look at a totally different example. Throughout the novel The Hunger Games, a novel in which characters are pitted against each other in a large-scale competition, Katniss was a part of one of the biggest governmental takedowns in literary history. She had to be sharp, wily, conniving, and manipulative. In spite of all this, Katniss is a reliable narrator because she is honest to other characters in the novel, straightforward in her storytelling, and protects others. So this is for a literary analysis essay, and you will not be required or asked to do something like this for the writing SOL, but I wanted to show you another example for how to hook your audience. I start by giving some context for the book, a novel in which characters are pitted against each other, so I make sure I put a little bit in there about what the book's about, but then I also, again, use another generalization. Katniss was a part of one of the biggest governmental takedowns in literary history. That may or may not be true, but it sounds really exciting, and now my reader probably wants to read a little bit more about what Katniss did that was so great. Again, I have this transition sentence about how she has to be sharp, she has to be a little bit sneaky and manipulative. So even though I've said some negative things, I'm transitioning to my thesis statement about how Katniss can be trusted as a narrator, and then say 3 things that prove that point. So again, you're not going to have to write an essay like this. It's a little bit more challenging, but I wanted to show you a hook statement for something, not for the writing SOL. Okay, so next we're going to write one together. And this is again another example for a writing SOL prompt. So let's take a look at it. You've been asked to share a lesson with elementary school students. Using specific details and examples, explain the lesson and why it would be important. So for this one, we are writing and describing a lesson that we would teach elementary school students. It's always important to really figure out what your question is asking. We also want to find that really important verb, which is, in this case, explain. So we have to explain what the lesson is, and then we also have to explain why it would be important. So this is an expository essay. Okay, next we have to pick our graphic organizer, and you all know that my favorite graphic organizer is the chicken foot because it requires the least amount of writing. So let's go ahead and what we're actually going to do, because I'm not really able to type on this graphic organizer, what I'm actually going to do, just for the sake of this digital lesson, is plan it out on a different slide. So first we need to figure out what that lesson is going to be. And a tricky one about this prompt, and students have received this one before, is that it doesn't have to be something that you've learned in school like figurative language, but it can be something that you think all students should know, like a life lesson. So first we want to think about what that lesson might be. And I think a really basic one to describe to elementary school students would be staying organized. So a lesson I would share with elementary school students is how to stay organized. Now we have to think of those 3 reasons. So again, we're coming up with one lesson and explaining why it's important, not coming up with 3 lessons. So it is important because will help you achieve higher grades in all of your classes. You will be more confident when you attend your classes. It will help you later in life. Now, we've said the word help in classes a lot, so when we're actually writing our essay, we may want to switch that wording around, but for now, we're just trying to get the ideas out there. Okay, so now we're actually going to write that introduction paragraph. And so in this case, I'm actually going to start with a question because I'm going to connect my question to a personal story or setting a scene for my reader to visualize. Okay, so I know that was a lot of me silently typing, but I also wanted you to see how long it kind of takes me to come up with an idea. So I start with that question. Have you ever felt the panic set in when you are searching for an assignment in class? The sweat drips down your forehead as you realize you have no idea where anything is located in your pit of a backpack. Also kind of worked in some figurative language in there with a pit of a backpack. If only someone had helped you stay organized, this never would have happened. That's why one lesson I would share with elementary school students would be to stay organized, because you will achieve higher grades, you'll be more confident in your classes, and it will help you later in life. So I hope that this mini lesson for Introduction Paragraphs has helped you. And feel free to rewatch this as many times as you need and talk to me in class if you need further help.